Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
How are you? Welcome to The World Over Live, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for letting us come into your home. A federal judge in California struck down a state ballot initiative restricting marriage to one man and one woman. Now, the same judge says, barring a successful appeal, gays and lesbians can be married in California next Wednesday. What does it mean for the rest of the country, and what is the state of marriage abroad? Princeton University professor and legal scholar Dr. Robert George will join us to discuss. And Pope Benedict XVI's trip to the United Kingdom next month is going to be one for the ages. We'll give you a preview of that trip tonight. My interview with retired Archbishop of Westminster, Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor at his home in London is straight ahead. If you'd like to join the program, drop us an email at worldover@ewtn.com. Let's get things started with the brief news from the world over this week. A Kentucky lawsuit which sought to make the Vatican responsible for clerical abuse that took place in the United States has been abandoned. Lawyers in the case were attempting to charge the Vatican with negligence by having U.S. bishops recognized as employees of the Vatican. There were even attempts to question Pope Benedict XVI under oath. The case was the first in U.S. courts to attempt to connect Rome to the American clergy abuse scandal. Jeffrey Lena, the attorney for the Holy See, said the development confirms, contrary to what plaintiffs' attorneys told the media for years, that there, quote, has never been a Holy See policy requiring concealment of child sexual abuse. Those lawyers, he said, have misled the American public, and the case against the Holy See only distracted from the important goal of protecting children. Similar federal suits are moving forward in Wisconsin and Oregon. Meanwhile, Pope Benedict XVI has chosen not to accept the resignations of two Irish bishops criticized for their handling of the clerical abuse scandal in Dublin. Auxiliary bishops Raymond Field and Eamon Walsh submitted their resignations in December after the Murphy Commission sharply criticized the Dublin Archdiocese for covering up evidence of sexual abuse. Earlier this year, Pope Benedict did accept the resignations of two other Dublin bishops. A Vatican spokesman refused comment on the matter. This past week, the bullet-riddled bodies of 10 volunteer medical workers were found in a remote section of northern Afghanistan. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the massacre. The missionaries were members of the International Assistance Mission, a Christian organization registered and sanctioned by the Afghan government. The organization, as well as families and friends of the dead, have denied accusations that the medics were attempting to spread Christianity. Among the murdered, 6 Americans, 2 Afghans, a German, and a Briton. 4 were laid to rest in Afghanistan this week. The bodies of the others are being flown to their respective home countries. Police are investigating. On Fridays, proponents of California's same-sex marriage ban filed an emergency appeal to overturn last week's court ruling that declared the voter-backed initiative unconstitutional. Attorneys for ProtectMarriage.com said the decision was riddled with both factual and legal errors and should be blocked. According to the attorneys, Chief U.S. District Court Judge Vaughn R. Walker ignored the law and tradition by concluding that gays should be allowed to marry. The 3-judge panel of the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will decide whether to uphold Proposition 8 or permit the recent ruling to stand. If the Ninth Circuit or the U.S. Supreme Court does not place a hold on the ruling, same-sex marriages will again be permitted in California starting next Wednesday. More about this in our next segment. And pro-life Republican and former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum said this week that he's considering a run for the presidency. Santorum said in an interview with the Daily Caller that he's actively cultivating donors, staff, and supporters for a potential 2012 run. Santorum, a Roman Catholic, has spent much of this year traveling to key primary states. During his tenure in the U.S. Senate, Santorum was one of the chamber's most active and staunch advocates for the life issues. He says he'll make his final decision about a potential run early next year. And a new survey released this week has revealed some troubling trends among Latino Catholics in the U.S. An Associated Press Univision poll finds that younger Latinos are much less likely to identify themselves as Catholic than their older Hispanic counterparts. Over just half of the young adults surveyed considered themselves Catholic, compared to 80% of those 65 and older. The poll found similar generational splits on issues such as abortion and same-sex marriage, with older Hispanics supporting Catholic teaching more than younger respondents. The poll also revealed that among Latinos, Protestants were twice as likely to attend Sunday services, twice as likely to oppose same-sex marriage, and more likely to be against legalized abortion compared to their Catholic counterparts. The results actually parallel other surveys conducted among all U.S. Catholics. And Hollywood legend Patricia Neal died of lung cancer on Sunday. She was 84. Neal's acting career started in the 1940s as a Tony Award-winning stage actress. She got her big Hollywood break starring opposite Gary Cooper in the 1949 movie adaptation of Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. With more than 60 films to her credit, Neal's career reached its pinnacle with her Oscar-winning performance in the 1963 film HUD. Despite her on-screen triumphs, her personal life was filled with tragedy and regret. In 1960, her infant son was permanently brain damaged in a car accident. 2 years later, she lost her 7-year-old daughter to measles, and in what she later described as her greatest regret in life, Neal aborted the child she conceived during an affair with her married Fountainhead co-star Gary Cooper. She said if there was one thing in her life she would change, she would have had that baby. She later found forgiveness and peace, becoming active in the pro-life community and converting shortly before her death to the Catholic faith. May Patricia Neal rest in peace. We'll talk more about Neal next week with our longtime friend and fellow actress, Mother Dolores Hart. She'll join us live here in studio on August 20th. And I want to remind you all that starting at the top of September, the world over will premiere on a new night, Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Life on the Rock will move to Fridays. We will be premiering on Thursday nights. Our re-air schedule remains the same. This will give many of you a chance to watch us live, and we've got a great lineup of shows coming in September and afterward. And if you find yourself traveling to D.C., why not come see us some Friday night in August and Thursday nights thereafter? Drop us an email at worldoverdc@yahoo.com to reserve your place. The World Over Live, again, moves to Thursday nights starting in September. Please don't say I didn't tell you. I told you. I told you many times. I told you so often, people are going to complain soon. Up next, Dr. Robert George joins us to discuss the legalization of same-sex marriage in California and around the world. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay with us.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. In California, the federal judge who overturned the state's same-sex marriage ban on Thursday refused to delay his ruling until higher courts can hear an appeal. Gay and lesbian couples could therefore seek marriage certificates as early as Wednesday in California. To discuss the ruling and the no doubt endless appeals is the founder of the American Principles Project, as well as the McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University, Robert George. Robbie, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be back on the show, Raymond. Thank you.
Let me first get your general opinion of the initial ruling by Judge Vaughn here in this case. What exactly is your take on his brushing aside this Proposition 8, a proposition that was voted on by a majority of Californians and put into place, merely defining marriage as the union between one man and one woman?
Yes, Proposition 8 simply restored the historic definition of marriage as the conjugal union of husband and wife. That understanding and definition of marriage had been disturbed by a ruling of the California Supreme Court, which the voters then chose to overturn to restore the status quo ante in the historic understanding of marriage. Then the opponents of Proposition 8 appealed it into the federal courts, where Judge Vaughn Walker, to absolutely no one's surprise, invalidated it. Invalidated Proposition 8 and held that the state of California has to recognize same-sex partnerships as marriages. I say it was no surprise, not because he had the law on his side. He did not. Rather, but I say it was no surprise because Judge Walker had permitted his own prejudices to be very evident. Everyone knew how he was going to rule on this case. He's a person who has very liberal views in matters of sexuality and those pertaining to marriage. He didn't try to hide them, and he ruled as he did to no one's surprise. What was surprising was the radicalism of the ruling, not just the outcome, but the radical way in which he dismissed the considered judgments of 6 million Californians and many more million other Americans, not to mention millions and millions of people around the globe and throughout human history. The judgment that marriage is the conjugal union of husband and wife, he dismissed as mere irrational bigotry, hatred, animus. That's a breathtakingly arrogant thing for him to accuse his fellow citizens and fellow human beings of. This could very well be considered a reasonable matter of disagreement. People have different views about the nature of marriage. People have different views about sexual morality. But Judge Walker was way out of bounds in ruling so radically as to dismiss his fellow citizens' point of view when they disagree with him as irrational and bigoted. I think the radicalism of the decision will render the decision very vulnerable to being overturned on appeal, and I certainly hope that the 11th Circuit and ultimately the Supreme Court of the United States will overturn it.
Robbie, I want to get into the marrow of this ruling and break it down for people and get your comments on it as we go along. But first, define marriage for me. This, I mean, it's an odd question, I know, to ask, but it's one that you often hear people saying, well, how do you define marriage? How would you define marriage, and what qualifies as a marriage? Is it bound to procreation? Is that part of the definition of marriage?
No one would have thought up the idea of marriage if it weren't for the fact that human beings reproduce sexually. I think anybody who's honest would acknowledge that. It simply wouldn't have occurred to human beings to invent the institution of marriage were it not for the fact that marriage requires a man and a woman who get together, engage in sexual intercourse from which a child can be conceived. And then the union of husband and wife is an especially apt relationship to provide a context for the rearing of children. So we know that marriage has something to do with procreation and the rearing of children, and in all societies it's been understood that way. We also know that marriage is not simply a means, a mere instrumental means to procreation, because after all, historically, we've always recognized that couples who cannot, because of an impediment to fertility, reproduce themselves, nevertheless can be married, and their marriages have been recognized by both the church and the state, and again across cultures and societies. So I think the key thing to understanding marriage and to understanding it as it has historically manifested itself, that is a relationship between man and woman, a relationship between two and only two people, not 3 or 5 or 7. Even in polygamous societies, each marriage was a marriage between a man and a woman, and a man and another woman, and a man and another woman. So to explain why history doesn't know polyamorous marriages where 3 or 5 or 7 people are married together, and also to explain why marriage is understood as a sexual partnership requiring sexual exclusivity and not something that can be consummated or sealed by, say, playing tennis together or agreeing that we'll only play tennis with each other and not with anybody else, where the exclusivity really is sexual. To understand that, we have to understand that marriage has the contours it does and the norms that it has by virtue of the fact that it is a relationship that is oriented to and uniquely apt for the coming to be and rearing of children. And that relationship can be modeled between husband and wife, even in circumstances where the non-behavioral conditions of procreation happen not to obtain. That is, the couple, one or the other, or both of them, are infertile. Both church and state have always held that so long as the marriage can be consummated, that is, the behavioral conditions of procreation can be fulfilled, that it remains a marriage if it's the foundation of their lives, if they engage in that sexual intercourse as the foundation or matrix of a comprehensive sharing of life at every level, a mutual commitment at every level, it can become the basis of a true marriage, even if the non-behavioral conditions of procreation happen for that couple not to obtain. So if we think about it carefully, if we're rigorous about how we understand the very central elements of marriage, such as it's being a sexual relationship, it's being an exclusive relationship, it's being two and only two, not three or five or seven, we can make sense of marriage as the union of man and woman. And we can recognize that some other understanding of marriage between man and man, or between one man and two women, or between three women and two men, or five women, simply can't be, whatever else it is, simply can't be a marriage.
I want to move on, because in Judge Vaughn Walker's decision, he says that because now gays and lesbians can adopt children, that this procreative aspect, if you will, is not cut off or denied them, that they can rear children. I'm going to read you this quote from his ruling. He says, Proposition 8 singles out gays and lesbians and legitimates their unequal treatment. Proposition 8 perpetuates the stereotypes that gays and lesbians are incapable of forming long-term loving relationships, and that gays and lesbians are not good parents. You say what?
I say that the same could be claimed on behalf of polyamorous people, people who want to enter into relationships in which their love finds its expression in groups of 3 or 5 or 7. Whatever that is, it's not a marriage. Whatever same-sex partnerships are, they are not marriages. 3 or 5 people together in a sexual partnership could raise children. I don't know if social science shows that the children who would be raised would be more or less prone to delinquency or drug abuse or anything like that. But we would still recognize that it's not a marriage. Marriage is a uniquely apt relationship for the rearing of children, because in that relationship, children have both paternal and maternal influences. Where marriage is normative, children are known and loved by the people who made them, caused them to exist. The ideal circumstance is where a child is known and loved by both mother and father, and where the love of mother and father supports that child's sense of his own worth and dignity in his relationship to his parents. We know that in non-ideal circumstances, things happen where we're in non-ideal circumstances. We do the best we can with adoption and so forth, and that's the right thing to do. But we know in those circumstances that children typically long to know their biological parents and to be known by them and to be loved by them. There's a reason for that. We human beings are bodily creatures. We're connected to other bodily creatures, including the parents who made us. Children, we now know from a recent study conducted by Elizabeth Marquardt in a wonderful book on sperm-donated children who came to be as a result of sperm donation, we know that children really do long to know and love and be known and be loved by their biological parents. Just having a donor isn't the same. You want to be loved by your daddy, not by a donor. So the ideal and normative situation is the situation in which the child is being raised by his biological parents. In less than ideal situations, we make do, we do the best we can, and many adoptive parents do a wonderful job. But they themselves have the experience of their adopted children wanting to be known by and to be loved by their biological parents as well. We need to honor that. We need to be serious about that and maintain as the norm the situation in which the child has the best possible chance of being reared by his biological parents, his mother and his father.
Robbie, I want to get into another aspect of Judge Walker's ruling here. He says at one point that religious beliefs that gay and lesbian relationships are sinful or inferior to heterosexual relationships harms gays and lesbians. Very briefly, your thoughts on this particular part of the ruling and the implications that it has on religious expressions in the public square.
Well, it's an overt expression of hostility to the Christian religion, and it's way out of line for a judge to engage in that sort of thing. It's part of the radicalism of the decision, which I think will render it very vulnerable on appeal. I mean, it's outrageous that the judge would enter into that domain and make the claim that Christianity harms people, whether they're same-sex attracted people or other people. From a Christian point of view, in upholding morality and in urging people to live upright lives in the sexual dimension of their lives, as well as every other dimension, far from harming them, we're assisting them, or the church, the faith is assisting them in living upright lives. And many same-sex attracted people strive valiantly and successfully to live morally virtuous lives, to live chaste lives, to abstain from immoral sexual conduct. And they should be honored, and the churches that support them should be recognized for that, and they certainly shouldn't have their motives impugned. The judge really is way out of line here.
I want to move on to this other quote where he says, Proposition 8 enshrines in the California Constitution a gender restriction that the evidence shows to be nothing more than an artifact of a foregone notion that men and women fulfill different roles in civic life. He's saying that this is merely an old saw that needs to be cast aside. Is that sufficient, and do you think it'll stand up to judicial appeal?
I don't think that it will stand up to judicial appeal. Certainly, if the judges fulfill their constitutional duties to be faithful interpreters of the Constitution, who take as the sources of constitutional meaning the text, the logic of its implications, its structure, and original understanding. What you see, Raymond, in the quote that you've read from Judge Vaughn is sexual liberationist ideology in full flower. This is not constitutional law. This is just one man's ideological predilections that he's dressed up in an act of raw judicial power as if it were the teachings of James Madison and our other founders as enshrined in the Constitution. This is not even pretending to be constitutional law. It's a kind of burlesque of constitutional law, and its radicalism will, I believe, result in its being overturned, as it should be.
Robbie, I want to play you a bite. This is Sandy Steyer. She opposes Proposition 8. I want you to hear her out and respond. Go ahead and roll that tape.
Because of Prop 8, our lives have been incomplete without having access to legal marriage. And today's decision does point toward a final piece that we've been waiting for with as much patience as possible. For me, this decision means equal protection under the law, which means an equal opportunity to marry the person that I love, the person that I choose, the person that I want to spend my life with. And it's what I want for us, but everyone else as well.
What's wrong with that, Robbie?
It's dead wrong. There are 500,000 polyamorous families in this country, according to Time magazine. This isn't some conservative report. This is the liberal Time magazine reporting that there are 500,000 families who are in group sexual partnerships in this country. Now, are those marriages, are those legitimate marriages or not? Here's what you can take to the bank logically. If we remove from our understanding of marriage the element of sexual complementarity, that is the idea that marriage is a union of sexually complementary parties, a man and a woman, oriented toward procreation and the rearing of children, then we are left with no ground of principle. Let me repeat that, no ground of principle on which to say that the belief that marriage is two people and not 3 or 5 or 7 has a rational ground. We would have to treat opposition to polyamory or the refusal to recognize polyamorous or group sex unions as irrational bigotry, just as Judge Vaughn Walker has declared conjugal marriage to be irrational bigotry. I think it's very important not to fall for emotional appeals such as the idea that love makes a family. If love makes a family, and if we treat love as essentially a matter of feeling, if that's what we reduce it to, then sure, Two people of the same sex can have romantic feelings for each other, but so can 3 people or 5 people or 7 people. This is not a prediction of what will happen, although it would, in fact, happen. The next claimants before the bar would be polyamorists. It's illustrating the principle of the thing. It shows that if we believe that marriage is a union of 2 and only 2 people, if we believe it's a sexually exclusive union, then we must believe as a logical matter that it's a union of husband and wife, not a union of 2 husbands or of 2 wives. That logic, as I say, you can take to the bank. And I put it as a challenge. I'm happy to do it here. I've done it in writing in many places. I put it as a challenge to those like the woman whose clip you just played for me. The challenge is to show any ground of rational principle for believing that marriage is 2 and only 2 people and not 3 or 5 or 7 once we remove the element of sexual complementarity in order to recognize same-sex partnerships. I've had that challenge out for several years now. No one has been able to meet it.
Professor George, your opponents say that this entire fight over Prop 8 and around the world, the struggle to legalize gay marriage, is akin to the Loving versus Virginia case, where that was the case that allowed interracial marriage, and that this is akin to that. That if you allow these 2 people loved each other, they were barred from having a union by the law, and that's all that these gays and lesbians are asking for. Why is that not an apt correlation there, an apt analogy for their struggle?
Not only, Raymond, is it not an apt analogy, as I said in a piece I wrote a couple of months ago for the Wall Street Journal, it's a ludicrous and offensive analogy. Opposition to interracial marriages was rooted entirely in support for a system of white supremacy which was racially profoundly unjust, one in which an entire class of people were subordinated to what was regarded as a superior class and left in an inferior position economically, socially, and in every other way, rendered subject to exploitation. In fact, the anti-miscegenation laws, which forbade interracial marriages, were attempts, in a certain sense, to redefine marriage. They added to the traditional definition of marriage, the conjugal conception of marriage as husband and wife, something irrelevant to it, namely race. Just as in the case now before us, there's an attempt to redefine marriage to eliminate the element of sexual complementarity. I think it's time that we stop trying to redefine marriage either for racist reasons or for sexual liberationist reasons and stuck with the original, historical, and best understanding of marriage, that is the conjugal union of husband and wife, because it's that relationship which has provided throughout history the original and best Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. It's in the marriage-based family that children flourish and human beings flourish. That doesn't mean that there aren't bad marriages. It doesn't mean that there aren't bad families. It doesn't mean that there aren't circumstances in which children are abused, even in relationships between men and women that are recognized as marriages. But it means the norm, for the most part, the best, historically best way to rear children is precisely in this context, the context of a loving relationship of husband and wife, a respectful relationship in which they care for each other and for the children that are born of the marriage.
Professor, Judge Walker just today said he's not certain that the supporters of Prop 8 have legal standing to appeal. He said they're not touched by this decision, nor can they enact it. So they may not be able to appeal to anyone. Your thoughts?
He's going to lose that one. He's going to lose it badly. And it shows that something I didn't think was possible is possible, that he could say something more radical than what he had said in the original opinion. This is still more radical. Look at what Judge Vaughn Walker is here saying. He's saying, I now, a single individual, have not only overturned the votes of 6 million of my fellow citizens of California, swept them away under my own rule, cast them aside so that I decide the meaning of marriage and the future of marriage. I have now put myself in a position where I cannot be reviewed by a higher court. In other words, he's established himself as a despot, as if he were sovereign. Now, fortunately, higher courts are not going to buy that for a minute. Judge Walker is going to be slapped down on this. Higher courts will take the case. They will recognize the standing of those challenging this ruling. to appeal it, and eventually the case will be before the Supreme Court of the United States. It's very hazardous to guess what the Supreme Court will do. I certainly hope that they will do what the Constitution requires and restore the principle of self-government here. But one thing that I'm very sure of, and that is that Judge Walker's not going to get to decide this for the whole nation.
Professor George, in what way, we hear this all the time, and we heard it again really in this ruling, in what way does the marriage of gays and lesbians, same-sex marriages, impugn or in any way diminish traditional marriages, your marriage, my marriage?
It changes the social definition of marriage. Instead of a relationship that is founded on sexual complementarity, of the sort that can generate the coming to be of children, so that marriage, although only indirectly, is nevertheless really something that is child-oriented. It changes it to a relationship that's fundamentally concerned with adult satisfactions and where children are merely an incident of the marriage if they happen to come. They're not essential, they're not intrinsic to it. It has nothing to do in principle with marriage. It's just about some state approval of adult sexual relationships, even if those sexual relationships are reasonably judged to be immoral by a lot of people in the country. So it's changing the definition of marriage not simply for one class of people, but for everyone, and putting the government behind that. It will also render the judgments of those of us who believe in the conjugal conception of marriage as the union of husband and wife, it will render them vulnerable to precisely what Judge Walker says they are, to the charge that they are mere matters of bigotry, which means that the religious liberty and freedom of conscience of believers in conjugal marriage, be they Catholics, Protestants, members of the LDS Church, Orthodox Jews, whoever they are, that their insistence on honoring their own convictions about the nature of marriage will be vulnerable to anti-discrimination attacks by which churches could be, for example, disabled from tax exemption. Employers could be forced to hire people who are in same-sex partnerships for church-related work, probably not the ministry or priesthood itself, but positions in schools, positions in parishes outside of the priest or minister role, and so forth. We have already seen, this is not scaremongering, because we have already seen Catholic and evangelical individuals and institutions come under the thumb of state oppression of religious liberty here as a result of the recognition of same-sex marriages or of same-sex relationships under some other legal description in other states. In Massachusetts, for example, Raymond, Catholic Charities, which had been placing orphan children in good adopted homes for more than 100 years, was forced to go out of business or else compromise its moral beliefs when it declined to place children in same-sex households after an anti-discrimination law was put into place, which included sexual orientation among its categories, and then Massachusetts, by judicial imposition, got same-sex marriage. No exemption was granted by the legislature. The legislature refused to grant an exemption to Catholic Charities because it treated the Catholic position as irrational bigotry that deserved to feel the whip of anti-discrimination laws. Out in New Mexico, where there was a similar anti-discrimination law that included sexual orientation, a woman who was an evangelical Christian who happened to be a wedding photographer, a photographer who did weddings. When she was asked by a same-sex partnership to photograph their blessing ceremony, she politely said that she couldn't do that because, as an evangelical Christian, she believed the biblical view about marriage and sexual morality, and so couldn't participate in photographing the wedding. She was reported to state authorities, who slapped a $7,500 fine on her for violating an anti-discrimination law. That shows you how long religious liberty will last if we continue to go down this road. Is it going to affect everybody? You bet. It's going to affect everybody. It's not just something that will be relevant to 2% of the population. It will affect everybody.
Professor George, very quickly, sure. And I've only got about 10 seconds here. When you see this legalized in Mexico, Canada, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and the increasing states here in the United States, isn't this a fait accompli? And where do you think this will go with the Supreme Court? Very quickly.
Absolutely not a fait accompli. 31 out of 31 times in the United States when this has been put to a vote of the people, including in the most liberal states like Wisconsin and California, there have been decisive victories for the conjugal conception of marriage. The American people do not want to throw it over. Secondly, I've been told in my life that lots of things were going to be inevitable, that communism was going to be inevitable, or at least it couldn't be rolled back. Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II put it on the ash heap of history. I was told in 1973 and 1974 when I was a boy that abortion would be accepted by the American people. In 10 years it wouldn't be an issue because young people were all for abortion. The tide of history was in favor of abortion. It would just be accepted and we would move on. 40 years later, far from moving on, more Americans are pro-life than ever before in our modern history, and young people are more pro-life than older people. There is no inevitability. Those of us who believe in the conjugal conception of marriage, those of us who believe in marriage as oriented to children and child rearing can win this. It's a question of whether we're prepared to organize and be bold and dedicated and not intimidated and stand up for what's right.
Dr. Robert George, thanks for joining us. And if you'd like more information on Robert George and the work of the American Principles Project, visit AmericanPrinciplesProject.org. When we return, my interview with Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, the former Archbishop of Westminster, on the historic and cultural importance of the upcoming papal visit to the UK. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Pope Benedict XVI's visit to the United Kingdom gets underway next month. My next guest knows a bit about papal visits to England. He's been involved in planning Pope John Paul II's trip to the UK back in 1982 and was involved in planning the current visit. He's the retired Archbishop of Westminster who recently sat down with me at his home in London to discuss his expectations for the Pope's visit, the state of Catholicism in increasingly secular Britain, and the Church's relationship with the Anglican Communion. Here's my exclusive interview with Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor. Your Eminence, what does this visit represent for Catholics in the UK? And then I want to move on and talk about the others.
Well, for Catholics in the UK, to welcome Pope Benedict is fantastic. It's twofold, I think. First of all, because Pope Benedict's a lovely man, and for him to come as Pope here in our country, with its history, to affirm the faith of the Catholic people here in Britain, I think makes them full of gladness and joy. So there's no question. He will get a great welcome.
Is it a vindication of the Catholic faith and those families, particularly who kept it through those dark periods where their faith was tested, persecuted, and
I think Pope Benedict knows a lot about the history of the Catholic Church in Britain since the Reformation, and I think he'll see it as an extraordinary event that he comes, as I say, to confirm the faith of this new Catholic people here in Britain. I say new. When I was young, and I talked a few years ago, the Catholic Church was very much on the periphery of society in Britain. Now, over the last 50 years, that has changed. The Catholic Church, together with our fellow Christians, is at the centre of what it means to be Christian in Britain today. And therefore, it's a new kind of, as I say, a new kind of church relationship for the Catholic Church in Britain.
The numbers seem to be on the ascendant because of migration and
well,
population.
that is certainly true, especially in this part of Britain, particularly because of the immigration. And it's wonderful now going around to the parishes here in London, which I've been doing for the past 10 years, and the mixed congregations, but united in faith. And every year I used to have a mass for immigrants in the Westminster Cathedral, vast crowds. And I'd say, look, here you are from all parts of the world. We're Londoners, but we share one faith here in this. And it was really very moving. It's like as if immigrants were going to the States, in the middle 19th century.
Right.
They got that welcome, the Statue of Liberty, but also they built their church, and said, this is we're making a statement about who we are, and so it's the same here in this country, in a different sort of way.
Yeah. Tell me, when Gordon Brown came to you, a year ago and suggested that the Pope come to the UK, or was it 2 years ago now?
Well, it's two years ago, yes.
What did he promise at that time? What did this, I mean, he made it was a formal invitation on behalf of the government and the Queen.
I'd already said to the Pope Benedict, it would be lovely if you're able to come to Britain. But the formal invitation on behalf of the government came from Gordon Brown. And I think he, in fact, of all the recent prime ministers, Gordon Brown was the one who appreciates more than any of the others the way in which the Catholic Church works for the poor of the world, because he himself has a great desire for the Millennium Goals, the Third World, and he realizes how much the Catholic Church does in that whole of that field for justice and for peace.
Are you surprised by the cost escalations with this visit, or is that par for the course?
Well, it's par for the course. We had the same last time. So that'll just have to be worked out, but I'm sure it will be.
Give me your appraisal, and you have been involved for a number of years on an Anglican Catholic coalition to bring better understanding between the faiths. You received a doctorate from Lambeth. Tell me your appraisal now of that Anglican community.
Well, I think I'd put it this way. On one level, the relationship theologically, from a theological agreement with the Anglicans, has been a great disappointment. I have to say that. When Pope John Paul came in 1982, I was appointed as co-chairman. And the hopes there of at least a situation arriving where we would have mutual recognition of ministries, mutual communion, and so on, were very great indeed. And it's been very sad, I suppose, that in spite of the fact that many agreements have been reached about Eucharist, about ministry, but on some crucial things, agreements have not been reached. And some developments in the Anglican communion, of course, have made it very difficult, especially one can't help mentioning the ordination of women to the priesthood, ordination of women to the episcopate, when the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, would not accept this at all in any way. So I think that has been sad. On the other hand, I must say that here in this country, Anglicans and Catholics get on extremely well. The bishops have regular meetings, Anglican bishops and Catholic bishops, because we're facing
similar challenges.
Similar challenges. Christianity is not the major influence in this country. It's a kind of septic secularism, really, and so we have to face this together. And to that extent, I think what we can do together, we do together, and that I think is very helpful and very good.
Is there a risk for the Queen, who is the head of the Anglican Communion, to invite the Pope at this particular moment of controversy, disunity within their own ranks?
I think that as far as I know, and I know and admire the Queen very, very much, I think she's looking forward to this visit and wants it to go well. And I think, she's Queen Elizabeth. The first Queen Elizabeth, was excommunicated by the Pope and persecuted the Catholics, and now we have another Queen Elizabeth saying, "No, Pope Benedict, you are very, very welcome in this country." So I think that's very good, and I also think that the Queen herself has developed ecumenically over the years. She's met so many Christians of other denominations, and particularly Catholic bishops. And I myself have stayed a weekend at her country house in Sandringham and preached to her, and we get on very, very well indeed. And I think the same is true for other Catholics as well. So I've no doubt that the Queen is not only in favour of the bishop of this visit, but also is looking forward to it.
There is no doubt the Queen was a little disturbed by the Pope's recent overtures to Anglicans who were disaffected and looking to convert and come to Rome. He's made that path a bit easier. Have they moved past that?
Yes. I think there was a misunderstanding there. There was no question of the Pope, as it were, trying to inveigle Anglicans into the church. It was just a way of approaching Anglicans who said we want to become Catholics, convinced they should, and as it were, easing the way for them.
Paint a picture, if you will, of the society that Benedict comes and confronts once he's here. This is a pope who for a long time has talked about the dictatorship of relativism, the secularity that he fears is absorbing his Europe. Is that what he faces full on when he...
He certainly faces that in Britain today, a secularism that is very profound, but at the same time, there's a kind of cri de coeur of people. We do need. They may not. The British people, a lot of them, understand that there is something that they lack. I suppose to put it badly, that there's something inside them that says there's more to life than just the physical, and therefore there is a spirituality. And therefore, to say that all is lost in Britain in terms of a spirituality, and indeed of a Christianity, I don't think is true. But I do think that the kind of way of life and the thought processes that go into education today are not helpful so people have to make their faith much more personal. And there's no folk religion anymore. I think when I was young, especially with the Anglicans, you would have said out of the 50 million people in Britain, there would have been 30 million nominal Anglicans. I say nominal, but baptized and adhering. I would have been brought up to know the Our Father, to pray, etc. Now I think that's kind of gone. And so while the Anglican Church still has a special place in this country, I think, like ourselves, we're together facing this non-believing Britain, not atheists, but searching.
And you think the Pope will speak particularly to those concerns?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think he will definitely. He'll speak about Cardinal Newman on that. But I do think his speech in Westminster Hall, which is extraordinary, really, here at the heart of Parliament, where Thomas More was condemned to death, and that there he is going to be speaking to the British nation, saying, and I think he will applaud some of the characteristics of Britain, but also he will be saying, there is such a thing, and this is what the Catholic Church has to offer. We don't want to impose, we can't impose what we believe, but to propose these beliefs, which we believe is for the enhancing of life and of truth.
Let's speak for a moment about Cardinal Newman. The importance of John Cardinal Newman among Catholics here in Britain. Do they know who he is? Is there a sense of who he is here?
Well, I think, yes. Well, they know who he is. Yeah. They know he's a great churchman, a great cardinal, that he was a convert.
Yes. And the leader of that whole Oxford movement. I mean, he was part...
That's right. 45 years at Anglican, 45 years at Catholic. And that wonderful, extraordinary Oxford movement. But the great thing about John Henry Newman was the way, and you read his letters and the years of coming to this decision of why.
Wrestling with it intellectually and otherwise.
Wrestling with it. And so if you say, do ordinary Catholics know everything about his life? No. But they know sufficient to know that he was a great convert, he was a great Christian, he was a great... and that he influenced the Catholic Church, not only in his own time, but also in our time, with the Second Vatican Council. So he's remembered for his apologia, for the reason why he became a Catholic. He's remembered, especially in Birmingham, for his years as a parish priest there. He wasn't just a theologian. And also for the ups and downs of his life, his sorrows and his joys. And it was really lovely among some of the many difficulties he experienced as a Catholic priest. And then at the end, as it were, Pope Leo XIII giving him the red hat to make him a cardinal. An extraordinary and wonderful life.
How will that beatification and that moment, which comes at the very end of this papal visit, how will that resonate and be read through the rest of England, through the Anglican believers and non-believers?
Well, I hope that both Anglicans and non-believers will see, well, why is he canonized, this not canonized or beatified, this man? And I think, apart from the sanctity of his life and the great theologian, I think also because Newman has something to say to this present society. And what he has to say is that there is such a thing as objective truth. That you can't have your truth and my truth. There is such a thing as objective truth, so that there is a right and that there's a wrong, and there's a true and a false. And I suppose what he mourned a lot in his when he was what he called liberalism. In other words, it doesn't really matter what you believe, but he says it does, because you can't dialogue with people. You can't search properly for truth unless you accept that there are basic truths. So. And I think that appeals to Pope Benedict very much in his campaign against relativism.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think, you know, his Pope Benedict's wish to proclaim certain basic truths about life, about reality, and about dialogue. How can you have respectful dialogue? Because he's not. And I think today, and that's what he'll say. We're not asking, as I've said, to impose our beliefs, but in respectful dialogue, to propose that this is a way of living that enhances, that nourishes life.
Well, I want to move ahead a bit and talk about some of the things you're involved in. You're on the Vox Clara Commission, which has been working for many years to bring us an updated translation, English translation of the liturgy. This is just about to kick off.
Sure.
Your thoughts on how this new translation will be accepted and embraced by the people as well as the clergy?
I think that it'll be easier for the people than for the clergy in a way, because there aren't all that many changes for the common of the Mass, and very minor ones. Well, the one people will know is we're not saying the Lord be with you,
and also with you,
and with your spirit,
and with your spirit.
But I'd say for the clergy, once they get used to it and practice it, it will be an enhancement to their understanding and pronunciation of the liturgy.
You have also been appointed as an apostolic visitator to Ireland to look at the sex abuse crisis there and to investigate what happened or didn't happen. Your thoughts as you begin to undertake that responsibility, and what role do you think the whole sex abuse crisis will play in the Pope's visit here to England?
Well, I think that with regard to Ireland, it's a very delicate situation there. They've been through a very, very difficult time because of this, the crime of child abuse and the sadness and the pain of the victims is always in one's mind, I suppose. But I think that already they have good procedures in Ireland for child protection or guardianship. And so I think that our visit will be to confirm and work in communion with the Irish bishops to make sure that those particular procedures are really as it were, firm, in place and accepted by everyone. Here, most of us, or in fact all of us who are going, have Irish backgrounds.
I noticed that. Dolan, O'Malley,
Murphy O'Connor.
Yeah,
so we don't go back to a strange land, it's where our forebears came from. So to assist in any way the Irish bishops and priests and people in the task of renewing the Catholic Church in Ireland in this new age, I think is yes, it's demanding. There's very little perhaps we can do, but it's, in a way, I think it's for me a privilege.
Do you think the Pope should meet with the victims of sex abuse? There's been some reportage that he's considering that.
Well, he's done that in other countries, and it's certainly very. I would be very surprised in a way if he didn't do it here. But I think if so, it would be very
discreet and private.
Very private,
as it's been in the United States and Australia.
And I think he'd also want to spend some time with those who have worked very hard in guardianship of children. I mean, 9 years ago, I set up the Nolan Commission here and the guidelines and rules that were accepted at that time, 10 years ago, for the protection of children, and have now been were adopted immediately by all the bishops. And we have very, very strong procedures here in Britain for the guardianship of children.
Before we go, I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for your support of EWTN for the many years in the past and presently. And what influence do you see the network having here in the UK?
Well, I'm interested in, I was going to say surprised. I'm not really surprised, but I think it's because of Sky Television, and it's on Sky, that all you got to do is press a button and you can get all sorts of interesting programs, and especially, of course, programs from Rome, the Holy Father. So I think people appreciate it very much.
Stay with EWTN beginning September 16th for our live coverage of Pope Benedict in the United Kingdom. We won't let you miss a moment of this historic visit. Go to EWTN.com for all the details. Until next week, you can find updates and the occasional commentary by following me on Twitter at twitter.com/Raymond Arroyo or on my Facebook fan page. Those of you who follow me will get previews of each show and additional news. You can always find me and a link to those sites at RaymondArroyo.com. The prayers and personal devotions of Mother Angelica and the entire Mother Angelica canon, including my biography of her, are available at bookstores everywhere and through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Finally, starting in September, the world over will move to Thursday nights at 8 p.m. live. Please adjust your schedules accordingly. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. Bye now.